goodness. You are such an inspiration. Wow, you really are. You're so strong. Can I pet your service dog? Ugh. 1, 2, 3, let's go! We are artists, parents, teachers, good guys, bad guys, students, leaders. I'm not your inspiration, yeah, I'm fully who I am. Got my own expectations that don't fit into your plans. I'm not your sad story, so I wrote it in this song. Everything you know about disability is wrong. Yeah, everything you know. Yeah, everything you know about disability is wrong.
Hi, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Everything You Know About Disability is Wrong. Today on the show, we have Tiffany Yu.
Tiffany Yu is the CEO and founder of Diversability, a 3 times TEDx speaker and the author of her new book, The Anti-Ableist Manifesto, Smashing Stereotypes, Forging Change, and Building a Disability-Inclusive World.
Tiffany started her career at Goldman Sachs before becoming a disability advocate, entrepreneur, speaker, and author. Welcome to the show, Tiffany. We are so excited to have you. This is a much anticipated episode. We've been so excited to have you as a guest.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really excited too. So before we get into it, we're going to do our audio descriptions. So I'll start. This is Erin. I have red hair and blue eyes, and I'm sitting in my wheelchair and just hanging out in my bedroom. So I'll pass it to Lily.
This is Lily speaking. I am a white passing Indian woman with half brown, half blonde, split down the middle hair, Corella DeVille style. I'm wearing my usual black turtleneck with my necklace that I will fidget with throughout the whole episode. And behind me is a bunch of great disability advocacy books, which Tiffany's will soon join the lineup. I read your book digitally, and now I need a hardcover to get back there. But you can go ahead and give your description, Tiffany.
Sure. Hi, everyone. This is Tiffany Yu. I am a Taiwanese American woman with shoulder-length black hair, and I'm wearing a green top sitting next to a hardcover copy of my book, The Anti-Ableist Manifesto, which has this orange gradient cover, and I'm joining you from my place in Los Angeles.
Awesome, thank you. So, before we get into other questions, the first question that we always ask is, the name of our podcast is Everything You Know About Disability is Wrong. And what do people get wrong about you?
Ooh. You mean about me in general or about me related to my disability?
Anything.
So I guess I'll give you 2 answers then. About me in general, I think I'm goofier and more ridiculous than people realize. I think there is a public professional persona of this ex-investment banker who does a lot of work in corporate workspaces. And yeah, I just love, I call it PFJ, play, fun, joy. And related to my disability, I think what people get wrong is just the assumptions that they make of what a person who can only use one arm can or can't do.
Yeah, totally. And you started Diversability, which I think is so awesome. Can you tell our listeners what Diversability is and why you started it?
So for those who are new to me, I was involved in a car accident at the age of 9 where I acquired both apparent and non-apparent disabilities. I permanently paralyzed one of my arms, known as a brachial plexus injury, and much later I'd be diagnosed with a mental health disability, post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. I share that context because for about 10 plus years after I became disabled, I had internalized a lot of shame, internalized a lot of ableism and stigma around, and had a very negative self-image and low self-esteem, just trying to navigate the world in now this newly disabled body. And I wanted to share that because I do think we have different experiences if you are born with your disability or if you acquire it. even different stories if you acquire it at a young age versus if you acquire it when you're a teenager or later in your life. So I started Diversability essentially to end the cycle of social isolation for disabled people. Now, that's what I say now, but initially I was really just curious if I'd be able to find other people, other disabled people who didn't think that the way I navigated the world was weird. And at a baseline level, I just wanted friends who got it. I would consider that now a term coined by Mia Mingus called access intimacy, people who understand your access needs. But Diversability started in 2009. So this is 12 years after I became disabled, as Georgetown University's first ever disability student club. And I think it's important to just share that a couple years before starting this disability club, I had co-founded a Taiwanese American club at Georgetown. And so what I knew how to do was I knew how to start clubs. Or at a baseline level, I knew how to start communities. I didn't know, starting the Taiwanese American club, prior to that, I didn't really identify as Taiwanese American. I had internalized that my success was rooted in assimilation and erasure of my race. And I can see a lot of parallels there to me and my own journey with my disability identity. So fast forward, I guess 16 years now, we've been around since that student club. We then emerged in New York City as a meetup group, a disability meetup group. And then when the pandemic started in 2020, we transitioned everything virtually. But in addition to ending the cycle of social isolation, I'm also really focused on what I call the shame to pride transformation around a disability identity. And one thing I think about is when we first started Diversability, I was like, oh, we're for everyone. But there are people who are disabled who may never want to feel proud of their disabilities or may never claim ownership or identify, and that's okay. And so I had to get really specific that perhaps Diversability as a community may not be for them. But if you are curious about what it would look like to be the wholeness of yourself in your liberated state, then check out our community. So we got a community, we host events, we run something called the D30 Disability Impact List, honoring disability leadership. And we're hoping that through our social channels, we can also help amplify and elevate research and advocacy actions available. That was a lot, but I wanted to make sure that I included the origin story because not only can I not believe that we have been around for 16 years, I think back to that 2009 timeframe a lot and how much pushback I received that creating a disability community was too radical. And someone even told me that they didn't think Georgetown was ready for something like that.
That's so wild. No, I appreciate the full context of it because I think it really does show the beauty of that community. And I think that the community and everything you've written about it really hammers home this idea of that, disability is not a monolith. And when you've met one person with a disability, you've met one person with a disability. And I appreciate in your book, you talk about like even meeting people with the same disability that you have, same title, life was lived differently. And I think that is an aspect that like relates back to the idea you brought up in answering the first question, this like assumption. I think assumption is the word that gets used most to answer that question, is like just people's assumptions and this idea of wanting to put disability into a box. And I love Diversability's like refusal of that. Like, no, you're not, it's not a box because everyone's experience is the same. I know for me, that has been important in my shame to pride journey. When you talk about shame, if you don't mind me digging into that a little bit, were there any moments in your experience gaining people who you had that access intimacy with, gaining people who understood what you were going through, where you started to identify, oh, I have shame about this, like about who I am? So I think that I've found times when I'm sitting in shame and not even realizing it.
Ooh, that is such a good question. I actually thought you were going to ask, how I started to unlearn that shame. So maybe I'll answer the question you didn't ask, which will provide some context. But I actually think that you said it perfectly, which is we don't know that we're sitting in the shame. And in 2020, when it was the start of the pandemic and many of us were in our homes, Diversability at that point in time, we were only doing in-person events. So I then shifted to looking at social media and even looking at something like TikTok, which I had heard some rumblings about, but wasn't sure. And I kept thinking, what is something visual that I can do on this video platform? And I started, and actually, because now we were at home, I live by myself. So I was like, I should probably learn how to cook or make something broader than salads and pastas and soups. And if that's all you want to make, that's fine too. So I had a whole series where I was learning how to crack an egg with one hand. And actually, I think I probably made 5 or 6 versions of that video because people would give me different tips of like, hit it on the counter or put it in a bowl or drop it in a pan. Anyway. But what I realized was, and the reason why I wanted to share that is I would open every video with context by sharing, hey, one of my arms is paralyzed. I'm trying to learn how to crack an egg with one hand. And what I realized even in that statement was if I look back at even some of my if I go back into the weeds on Instagram and I look at how I took photos, my arm was always hidden and my hand was never seen. It was like I had figured out a way to, shift it behind my hip or put it behind someone else, or even the way I'd hold my hands together would be hiding the hand, right? And so I don't know if it was necessarily me being in community with other people, I guess in community online, because many of us are chronically online and that's how we meet. And in some ways, I'm just really grateful to have social media didn't exist until I was an adult. But now that we have it, we're able to find each other so much quicker. So all of a long-winded story to just say, I think it was the introduction of wanting to push myself into creating content as a way to expand my advocacy that made me go back and look at all of the habits I had formed to try to hide my disability, which essentially was the root of a lot of my shame. And then I watched a TED Talk by Brene Brown, and she said, shame festers in secrecy, silence, and judgment. And so then I took that, and I even made a TikTok about that one sentence in itself. And I said, what are the areas of my life that I'm giving shame more power because I'm able to hide my arm in a photo, or I'm able to and for me, like the silence and the secrecy was the way that my shame really got more power. So I was like, the best way I'm going to force myself to not give shame that much power is by putting it front and center in a place that is subjected to unsolicited opinions on the internet, which I know is something that people may fear sometimes.
Yeah, that's a little bit of trial by fire there on the internet. But I really appreciate you sharing that. Thank you for answering that question, because I think that something it taps into is this concept of that, like, you don't have to be complete in any of your journeys, whether that's like acceptance, unlearning shame, unlearning ableism, to start creating your content, whether it's content or whatever it is. I think that like something I had a fear of for a long time was like, well, maybe I'm not a perfect disability advocate yet. So should I even call myself one? Mm. And doing this podcast has been really helpful in terms of meeting amazing people and understanding that, like, we all have these journeys. We all have shame. We all deal with internalized things. Don't wait for those things to be gone before you start doing the things you want, because doing the things you want is usually where you start to unlearn those things. So I really appreciate that perspective. Thank you for sharing that.
I guess I'll put just a small asterisk in it and say that I feel I feel really grateful to have a strong support system so that if my way of unlearning shame is putting something out on the internet, I know that there are other places that I can turn to for support in case something goes awry. And I think that's been something that has been important to my sustainability as an advocate. And even I think one of the things I had to unlearn too was I don't need to have a hot take on everything that is happening in the disability space. And I do think there was a period of time, like you said, about like, what does it look like to be an imperfect advocate? But how do we be an advocate in community with so many other movers and shakers, right? And so if there's something like, and so for me, I think about like micro advocacy a lot. Like, what are the things, if I don't know what to say, that little share button that looks like an airplane triangle is just right there. And I can amplify something else that someone has put a lot of time and research and effort into. And that can't necessarily be the only thing we do, but that's a start to say, okay, I don't know what to say, or I don't have the right thing to say right now, but I do know that there are other people I can turn to, trusted voices that I'm willing to share, have them share and come onto my platform.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that you don't feel like you have to have an opinion on every single topic in the disability community, because I see that a lot on social media, not just like the disability community, but I feel like disabled people tend to be, I think, more chronically online because of the accessibility of it compared to the outside world. And building community on the internet is a lot easier and more accessible. But I do think there is a fear in some people that they're going to say, they're going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. And I feel like having that grace for people to make a mistake is fine. And I feel like having that space that's open like that makes it even easier for people to get involved in the community.
Yeah. And I do wonder if we are giving people that space to make mistakes. And I've had my own experiences. I guess the way I look at it is there are parts of my life where I want to learn out loud. And so I will learn out loud, which means things will show up on social media. And in some ways, I feel grateful that our community trusts us enough to let us know when we've made a mistake, and is forgiving and gives us the grace. But I also look at how quickly sometimes cancel culture doesn't give people the space to make mistakes, right? And then that fear comes in. And sometimes, right, and this is privilege. Privilege says it is easier to opt out than it is to learn out loud and try to make a mistake. And part of this book, the Anti-Ableist Manifesto, was really about how can we make disability advocacy accessible for everyone? Because I want people who are not disabled yet to join us. I want the people who enjoy audiobooks and electric toothbrushes and jacuzzis and elevators and luggage with wheels, who are appreciating our access features, to also appreciate us. And I think that because, and I don't know if you have, I guess this is me asking you for a hot take, is like, I know, actually I heard Nicole Kidman say this. She said, I know what actions I can take to make a difference, because she was talking about working with women directors. She said, this is what I know how to do. And then she kind of tied it into the economic imperative too, which is like, when the film does well, it signals to the industry that more, but she was saying, I know what I can do. So what I can do is give people grace and write a book about, hey, learning should never be about shame. And please, I want to make this digestible for you. The chapters are so short. I think there's one chapter that's even 3 pages. There are reflection questions for you to digest. There are suggested scripts and action items in there for you too. But yeah, I don't know if we've gotten better about giving people more grace around making mistakes.
I don't think we have. But
Yeah.
I am seeing more grace given, but it's still not where it used to be. And that to me is upsetting because I know there's a lot of people out there who maybe don't consider themselves as having a disability, but they do. And then having this like cancel culture, however you want to phrase it, is scary to them. And they're afraid to explore their identity in a safe space.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting point. What is a safe space when you are a marginalized group in front of the world on the internet, right? Because I think that there is some level of, this is why we, in past episodes when we've talked about representation, the topic of representation is so tricky because there's a lot of weight on a lot of pressure on every disability story to get it exactly right because there are so few disability stories being made. And I think that similarly, we're still, I mean, in my world, it feels like disability content is everything. But I know that there are a lot of people who on the internet are not encountering disability content that often. So there is still a pretty intense pressure to get it right. And I think, Tiffany, what you have done is the exact right response to that, which is not to try to get things right, but to try to help other people easily understand. Because the more that, and I completely agree. I think your book is an incredibly accessible read, and it does something that we talk about at Easter Seals a lot, where it takes disability language, which is for some reason kind of oddly gatekept, and just makes it easy to understand for others. And that's difficult to do. There's a lot of acronyms when it comes to services or just lots of jargon. And I think your book is a really great intro spot. So I think I want listeners who want to venture onto the internet, if that's where they're hoping to make their mark, to feel empowered to, as Tiffany put it, learn out loud, but also to know that there's a need to get do some work first. And so I think Tiffany's book is a great place to start to ensure, because I know that for myself, I've just talking to so many cool disabled creators and writers and athletes and actors through this podcast, I've learned so much. And there has been moments where I look back on things I've said in old episodes and I'm like, oh, I think I learned out loud, pretty loud there. But I like having that space. I appreciate it. It has helped me grow. So just a reminder that you can make things without them being viral.
I get, in some ways too, I think about what you were saying, and I read this in Shonda Rhimes' book, Year of Yes, about the FOD, the first only different. And one of the things she says is that the FODs, we all have the same weary look in our eyes because we don't have any space to make mistakes because everyone is watching, right? And so, I do talk a lot about how I think in our culture, we have this obsession to be the first, but hopefully we don't stay there for a long time, right? And then we find community. And so, Lily, you asked where are those spaces, those safe spaces where we can learn. I hope Diversability can be one of them if that's what you need. And that's why I kind of come back to having a support system where if you are someone who does want to do something publicly, just making sure that you have, I don't know, a soft place to land privately.
Yeah, absolutely. And having people you really trust as well is important. I think it's super important to have people in your life that will take maybe a call out that you're getting and turn it into a call in and help, because, you know, processing making mistakes sucks. That's a truth. And but I think that space, the processing making mistakes, being willing to own up to them is, and holding the capacity for forgiving someone after they've said something you deeply disagree with. That's how we continue to make these spaces, I think. Yeah, it's an interesting place, the internet. But
and I also think, you know, sometimes there are just mean people on the internet, but I also think sometimes there are well-meaning people who like us enough to hold us accountable for something that we did. Again, hopefully not in a malicious way, but I guess I try to look at it as like, oh, this person felt comfortable enough to tell me this. And let me apologize and think about what action I can take to potentially repair.
Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction to make too, is like, there's definitely malicious people out there who are just saying the worst things to just get attention or be a jerk. I don't know. But there's also people who just made a mistake. And I feel like sometimes the internet lumps them together, which is just not the way to get around creating safer, better spaces.
yeah, and I'm having a moment where my brain's forgetting exactly what I was going to say, but I'm going to find it. I'm going to find it because it was something I did want to say. It was something good. Oh, there's such, like, it takes a lot of care to call someone out in person. Like, I have found in adult friendship, it's the friendships where you do have those difficult conversations, that there is real love there. And that's a great, like, thing to remember if you're being told, like, hey, your language is outdated, or we don't say that term anymore, or this is an ableist thing. I think that it's a great thing for people to keep in their back pocket, this idea of, like, assuming benevolence and assuming, like, a kindness to these call outs, because that's what they would be in person. And, you know, there's also just the bad actors on the internet that are there to do whatever, but maybe that's a way to help even cope with the trolls on the internet, though, is to be like, well, they're taking the time to comment on my stuff, so I must be important.
Engagement on my blog or whatever.
And that doesn't invalidate that the mean comments still hurt your feelings. And
yes.
And I don't know why we have to be mean to each other on the internet or in person. And even though, you know, I kind of think about that part too, where it's like, oh, you know, it's really more about them and something they're going through, but then you're the byproduct of it.
Yeah.
And it's totally valid to feel hurt by that. I mean, I will say, in the beginning of my social media journey, the number of comments I received from people about my hand, and they'd say, your hand's useless, you should just cut it off. Or they would do, like, the dinosaur emoji, because I guess my hand looks like a dinosaur's hands. But it would come, I mean, my first video that ever went viral got, at that time, I think it was 1.4 million views. If I ever saw 1.4 million people somewhere, I would be totally sensory overload. But with 1.4 million people seeing that, it meant tons of comments, and I had to take a step aside because I was also just like, wow, Tiffany, you've been doing this work, like visible in this space for 10 years. And I noticed myself, and I love something Stephanie Thomas actually said to me. She said, don't let people bully you into becoming someone you're not. Mm-hmm. But I remember I was so affected by all the comments for a small period of time that I actually learned a new strategy. I don't know if I would totally recommend it, but it's called post and ghost. Because you just don't know what you're going to get with the comments sometimes. So if I'm like, okay, I'm here to educate, or the purpose of this post is to share a moment of joy, I'm going to channel that emotion into me, putting that energy out into the world. And sometimes I'll still look at the comments, but if it's really overwhelming, like a post going viral, I forgive myself and have compassion and say, hopefully your community will step in and answer things if needed. Like I just had a post from a couple years ago resurface, and people are like, why does she tie that bandana with her feet? And then someone else came in and they said, oh, if you look at her other videos, she got into a car accident. She can't use one of her arms. And I was like, okay, now I don't have to retell all of that all over again. All the context is there somewhere.
Yeah, context is such an interesting topic when it comes to disability. I love the way you address it at the start of your book, in that, like, we don't owe anyone our stories, but you are choosing to share yours. And I think that it's just an interesting topic, because there is that level of, like, wanting people to understand, especially in a world that has TikTok, where exactly what you said, videos from 2 years ago randomly resurface and no one's watching everything in order. No one's watching the pinned video first. And it's such an interesting time. And in terms of, like, how much of your identity do you have to share? And because I sometimes find myself, like, laughing at myself in the way that I'll, like, slip into conversation that I'm autistic, because it's not apparent sometimes. Sometimes it's very apparent. Or slipping into conversation that, like, my mother's from India, because I can tell that everyone in the room is assuming that I'm white because of how I look. And, like, those little moments of, like, hey, you need this context in IRL is a different beast to handle than making videos or making individual pieces of content. So how do you kind of, like, decide how much intro to give each piece of content at this point in your career, where there is a book out there that has your full story?
Ooh, good question. There were even people who were angry that I opened my videos that say, hey, my arm was paralyzed in a car accident. And then I stopped including that context, and then people would ask the question again. And so, I will say, and it's fascinating that we have spent all this time talking about content, because I've slowed, or I guess I've been more gentle on myself, because I wrote an entire book, and I do not have the same level of energy that I did to record video content as I did a couple years ago. So I don't even know the last time I made content that was like that to me. I actually just returned from the paraclimbing national championships, and I was the only one-armed climber. There are other climbers who climb with their arm, and then they may be an amputee on their other arm, but they're still using their limb to climb. And I guess one of my learnings from that was, even though my arm is paralyzed, I am curious if there are ways that I can still use my injured arm to climb. But I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent to say that I guess in my journey of, whether it's creating content online or meeting people in person, there's a 10-minute version of the car accident, which you can watch. It's a TEDx talk from 2018, where, similar to you, Lily, I used well, not similar to you, but you were talking about how maybe in the past episode use language. I used to describe my disabled arm as my funny hand. And that's what I did in my 2018 video. I think of all my TEDx talks, that one has the most views. And I would not describe my body or anyone else's body as funny anymore. I'm learning, but people are still seeing that video. And back to your question, as you can see, I went on a little journey.
It's perfect.
But I also have a one sentence version of the car accident too. So if I can think, most recently, I was at a restaurant, and before the entree came out, I said to our server, "Hey, my arm is paralyzed. If it is possible, if they can cut the dish in the kitchen before it comes out, that'd be really helpful." So yeah, I think that's where the context comes in. I do also, I love this question about like how much do you share? And I think back to growing up, most people that I grew up with assumed that my arm injury was from birth. Mm-hmm. And if you have read the book, I dedicate the book to 9-year-old Tiffany and my late dad. And I think part of people assuming that my arm injury was from birth, in my own story, felt like it did a disservice to honoring the memory of my dad. And so that's why I personally have chosen to say, hey, my arm was paralyzed from a car accident, because there was more to Tiffany becoming disabled in that is important to me and how much I want to honor of that story, versus just saying, hey, my arm's paralyzed. And it could even be like, my arm's paralyzed, and then you and then you come up with all these assumptions, right? I used to make this joke that I felt like my anxiety was like this Oscar award-winning director, because the stories it would come up with were so vivid and real that it would win awards in my mind. Yeah. And so I relate that to say, part of, I think, why we share context is how can we get ahead of the assumptions first? Because even in this journey of wanting to get into rock climbing, first question was always, how do you climb on a rock wall? And then you just say, with one arm. And and then it's like, how does, I don't know. I just think about all of the assumptions that we make, that the assumptions that we make about all different people's types of disabilities. Like, how does a blind person dance with their body and their legs and their arms? So yeah, I think I haven't gotten tired of sharing the context, because it's, and it can get tiring too, but I think part of it is because I have slowed the content machine. Mm-hmm. And also now, like you said, now the book is out, and because of that, like, more people know, so I don't have to explain myself. But even still, I mean, I even notice, this is unrelated to disability, but kind of but related to context. Anytime I meet someone new, I will always remind them of my name, even if, and then they'll be like, of course I know your name. But I don't know if you've ever been in situations sometimes where, you've seen a face so many times, but maybe you don't know their name. And then after a certain point in time, it gets to a point where you've seen them for enough times that it's now awkward, that I'm just like, I'm going to get ahead of that and be like, hey, so good to see you, Tiffany. And they'll be like, I know who you are, but hey, what if they had forgotten?
Yeah, there's like a saving yourself that kind of awkward moment by preempting that I totally relate to. I do stuff like that all the time.
I love that, and I'm gonna steal it, because I always forget people's names, and I think it's related to, like, my anxiety. Because if I'm in a meeting, all I'm thinking of like, how am I going to say this? What am I going to say? What's going to happen in the meeting? That like names just fly out the window. So that is a really good tip, is to say your own name first.
Yeah. I mean, I even remember I used to have a podcast, and I feel like we're totally going on a tangent here, but feel free to take us back on track. But I remember I would do a podcast and I would ask the guests to pronounce their name. And then during the intro, I would be so nervous or something. And then I would still pronounce their name incorrectly, even after I practiced saying it so many times. So I don't know, maybe a little bit of grace.
Yes, conversation. It goes right back to the grace conversation for sure. Because there was, I think we are nuanced enough people to understand that getting people's name pronunciation is important and valuable, and you can mess up someone's name with no malicious intent. Like those nuances exist. So I appreciate that. I wanted to say one thing about in your context answer. I'm so glad we did dive into all of this, because I think it really hammers home that the diverseness of disability, in that there are no like hard and fast rules of how you should talk about disability, because of exactly what you just said, that your context means something very important and different to you than someone else's context might mean. And it holds that space for your father. And that's so important for you to honor that. And I think that is where it can get really dangerous to like think like, oh, well, you shouldn't have to explain. No one owes anyone their story. Don't tell your story. No, you can do whatever is comfortable for you. So I really appreciate you saying that, because it does show that each of our relations with our own disabilities are our own, and that is important. and
it comes back again to context. Like I think about why you're sharing something, right? And I have friends in the space who will say, lead with what your access is, right? Focus on what the barrier is you're trying to address, rather than the intricacies of someone's medical history, right? So, if I'm at a camp, which I do mention in the book, with other people who have brachial plexus injuries, we'll go into details about things that were going on. But the only context I need to provide to the server is that I can't cut the dish I can't use both hands. So here is the access that I would benefit from in that situation. And so if you are someone who doesn't want to be so out and loud about whatever your disabilities are, again, just focus on the barrier and what your access needs are in that particular situation. And I think I include this script in the book. It's the I would benefit from, and then fill in the blank. And I've done that exercise actually with a lot of people before. I tell them like, how would you complete this blank? And some people would be like, I would benefit from working in a workspace that has dimmer lights. I would benefit from getting an agenda for this meeting. And I'm sure you've even had podcast guests before who prefer the questions that you're going to ask before you start recording, right? And so even with that, we don't need to know the deeper context unless someone wants to. And I love the way that you named that for each of us, those mean different things to us. And if we have the agency and the autonomy to choose when and how we want to share and honor those things, like, I love that.
Yeah, I think autonomy is just such an important thing, especially for me, and I would venture to guess for others in that shame to pride journey. I noticed when I was being a lot more autonomous with my decisions instead of doing what I thought I was supposed to do, I was able to find a lot more pride in who I really was, because I was being that authentic. Well, okay, I want to transition a tiny bit because we have not too much time left. And there's one, I think your trajectory is really cool. And the way you got into advocacy is unique, and in the disability space, almost a tale as old as time. The like stumbling into it because you had to, and advocating for yourself and things like that. I wanted to bring up, there's a quote from the start of your book that I really like. In the first chapter, you're saying that much advocacy work looks like this: planting the seeds for work that others will take on in the future. Even if we do not achieve that original goal, it can bring about wins that we may not know for years to come. So I love that quote, and I would love for you to share with our listeners and viewers, what are some examples of what that kind of planting seeds can look like? And have there been any examples in your life of seeing those seeds blossom much later when you expected the seeds to have died long ago?
The person who first said something like that to me, I always got to give credit where credit is due, is someone named Ingrid Tischer. I don't know if her name sounds familiar. She used to work at DREDF. And when I first moved to the Bay, she was just an incredible co-conspirator and friend. And I bring her up because I was actually working on a project, an intergenerational project where you'd have someone of one generation interview someone of a different generation.
Oh, cool.
Something Ingrid brought up was how it wasn't until I think she was 7 years old that she had her right to an education protected. And we talk about the ADA, Generation Americans with Disabilities Act. And for as long as I've been disabled, the ADA has been around, and it's turning 35 this year. You know, it's in its mid. But anyway, I just wanted to honor that. And she was like, I wonder if it's a millennial thing that you want, or maybe I call it like the attention economy that we're currently in, that we want results right away. And I share this near the end of the book, which to me are kind of what I consider like the unintended positive impact of something that you did. And the quote that you read was about some advocacy actions that me and a group of friends were trying to take around getting a more neutral definition of disability that didn't necessarily use the word impair. I prefer impact. I also even talk about in that chapter about how dis is associated with bis and duo, which essentially means that disability is another way of being or doing, which essentially it is. So I digress. Small.
I love that.
But the example that I share is actually related to that 2018 TEDx talk that I mentioned. And in that TEDx talk, the title of it is called The Power of Exclusion. And I share the example of being a 9-year-old kid returning to gym class after I became disabled and really not belonging in that space. And how much that impacted me. And I think even recounting it now, I still feel soft-hearted around her and that experience and having to get dressed for that class every day. This is after I tell you I just went to the paraclimbing national. I have rediscovered my joy of sport and adaptive sport in my own way. But a couple of years ago, I think 2 years ago, actually, I went to a camp for people who have my injury, and they invite doctors and families. And a pediatric hand surgeon comes up to me and he goes, "Oh, I watched your TED Talk." And I am someone who, after 9 years old, and maybe some disabled people can relate, but I went through the ABCs of medical treatments and doctors. I had physical therapists, occupational therapists, hand surgeons, shoulder surgeons, neurosurgeons, acupuncture. I don't even know if I said acupuncture already. It was a lot. And we talked briefly about autonomy. I do not felt like I had autonomy over my body, not in a harmful way, but I just didn't know. I didn't know. And I also have compassion that at 9 years old, it's okay to not know. But now I'm in my late 30s. So anyway, so pediatric hand surgeon tells me he watches my video, and I shared all that context about the ABCs of the medical professionals because I turned to him and I said, "Hey, I actually have a difficult relationship engaging or with medical professionals just because of a lot of medical trauma that I felt like I was subjected to as a child. And he was like, oh, that's cool. And, we just kind of coexisted. And then later I think he was either speaking on a panel of other medical professionals, or he came up to me later and he said, I want to let you know that as a function of watching your TED Talk and seeing that you didn't really have mental health support through your rehabilitation, we have actually added a mental health professional to our rehabilitation team for kids who have brachial plexus injuries, who are going through their surgeries XYZ, right? So oftentimes, at least for me growing up, there was so much fixation on the physical manifestation of my disability that there wasn't really much support about understanding what was going on emotionally and what was I feeling and how was I doing. So that to me felt like a seed planted that grew into a beautiful thing that now anyone who works, and he's a very celebrated pediatric cancer surgeon, very well known for people who work with, for people who have brachial plexus injuries. I had no idea when I recorded that talk in 2018 that a doctor would see it and think about, how can we bring care, I could call it anti-ableism, into this space so that kids who have disabilities can feel more supported as they're going through things they might not even understand. So that one was pretty cool. And then even just yesterday, I did a podcast interview with a friend, and I only know him through his climate justice work. And he shared with me that after reading this book, he didn't realize that mental health disabilities like anxiety and depression were disabilities. And he started having that conversation with his mom, and now being more open about the ways that it affects him and the support that he's needing, and contributing to a conversation around removing the stigma around mental health. So, I mean, and that was even just yesterday, and so I think about that, and in a lot of ways, I had fears around writing this book, right? Because once it's in book form, you can take down a social media post. In book form, it's out there, and it is subjected to even more unsolicited opinions than a social media post that has my face on it. People are reading this book who, unless they turn to the back flap and see my photo, may never know what I look like or who I am. But they're reading this book because they were interested by it. But they are taking actions, or it's shifting their views, or they're realizing, oh, I can actually be a part of this conversation because I have a disability as well. And how do I play a role in making my non-apparent, like shedding more light on my non-apparent disabilities, and that disability doesn't have one look. So those are some of the seeds so far. I mean, as we're recording this, the book has been out for 5 months, and that has been my favorite part, is seeing how, and I don't know if that was an unintended impact. Part of it was, okay, I have this social media series. I am an educator in this space. How do we reach more people who maybe are not my first degree, or maybe might not be able to see my content? But hey, if you're wandering in a bookstore or your library, an orange cover may catch your eye, a provocative title may catch your eye. And it was cool. I guess one other thing I'll say is, I talked to a friend in Australia who told her friend that she was talking to me, and her friend was like, oh, the orange book. And I was like, wow, we've created such strong branding. And I was telling Lily before we started recording that the book is launching in the UK, but does not have an orange cover. But once someone told me that the orange cover had such a strong association, because at first I was changing my emoji colors. I went through an orange period and then I was shifting it to yellow for the UK. And I was like, you know what? People know the orange. The UK is yellow to red and has some orange in it. So I'm going to stick with the orange. But yeah, it's been cool. Every once in a while, I'll Google the title of my book and see what conversations people are having. They don't even tag me, and you don't need to tag me. And then someone shared an article about the disability tax. There's a chapter on the disability tax, and the excerpt was shared in The Guardian. And they shared that article and then tagged their employer and said, hey, maybe one way that we can address the disability tax is by including in our job descriptions, like what type of health benefits we're including. And this is in addition to being transparent about what the pay is and other things like that. And so yeah, changes are happening and I may never know about them, but when I do learn about them, it reminds me that all of our little micro actions together, those shares, create this collective action that make things better. Because I guess even in reflecting on what Ingrid said to me about like plant the seeds, you may never see what plant it grows into, but be patient, is in 2009, I told people I wanted to start this disability club and I wanted it to be rooted in disability pride. And I cannot tell you the amount of confused looks I got because people couldn't understand how a disabled person could be proud. 10 years ago, I don't know if I knew any books by disabled authors. And maybe that was my own limited purview. But now now I have so many friends. Andrew Gurza has a book coming out next month. Lachi's working on a book. Molly Burke, I think Alice Wong is working on her next book. Like so many disabled authors putting their legacies and narratives out into the world to help contribute to making change. It's pretty cool. So I have seen change. And even, as we started recording, we were talking a little bit about Wicked and authentic casting and Maria Bodie as Nessa Rose. And so it's all part of this shift. But if we're so hyper-focused on the results, I think we will lose sight of the fact that there actually has been change that's happening.
Definitely there's been change. Like, in the 90s, 80s, 90s, it's a totally different world for people with disabilities. But yeah, I did want to ask one final question. You talked about how there's a lot of books out there by disabled authors. Can you give our listeners or viewers another book that you would recommend?
Ooh. Is it a book by a disabled author?
Yeah.
I mean, I always have to recommend Haben by Haben Girma. Yes. Books that are in my queue that I haven't read yet. One is called Dateable. It's about dating with disability and chronic illness. Shane and Hannah Burkaw just came out with a book called Interabled. They're on my bookshelf. But even like, how exciting is it that there are more books than I can read at the moment?
It's so exciting.
And one of the UK events I'm doing is with an author named Liam O'Dell, who wrote a book about like research in the autism community. And the name is escaping me right now. But yeah, and then Frances Ryan has a book coming out next month. Not too many. Never enough books, but Hoppin' is a good one. Disability Visibility. I did see someone comment on one of the social media posts about other book recommendations, but I guess I'll share. Pippa Stacey actually wrote a blog post recently, and she has a book. I think it's called like How to Live with Chronic Illness or something related to chronic illness. And she put a list together of some of her favorite books by disabled authors. So, and I do mention this in my book too, is sometimes just doing an online search can help you find what you need. So you could search for books by disabled authors. If you are someone who loves supporting independent bookstores, you can search for disability-owned bookstores. I have my own personal list of about 10, I believe, that I have found, and buy your book from there.
Awesome. Can you share that list with me?
Yes.
If you have a good chance. Okay, awesome.
Do you want me to share it with you? I can email it to you after. You mean the list that Pippa put together?
That you put together.
Oh, of the disability-owned bookstores? Yes.
Yeah.
And that was
awesome.
also, I think that was actually a post from Libro.fm. So I'll send those to you.
Okay, cool. Awesome.
Man, this was such a good conversation. And I got to say, I've been sitting quietly for a second, which I rarely do. But it's because I had to swallow a few times to not get choked up. You talking about mental health supports being put in for like just that seed growing is really gorgeous. I was a very unwell teen, and I say it often. I do everything I do for unwell teens. And so that's really beautiful. And I just want to point out too that I love that your book is dedicated to 9-year-old you. And I think that there's these seeds that we're talking about. Obviously, Tiffany is an incredible advocate who has done lots of things, and her seeds are, a TED Talk and these amazing things that she's done. But the earlier seed there was that struggle that her 9-year-old self, like that you went through with those doctors, and like that you honoring that struggle and including that conversation in your work, that was also part of what led to all of this. And I just think that that's an important thing, because maybe if you're listening to this, you might be in the midst of the struggle that someday could become the seed that becomes your blossoming plant. So I just wanted to say that, because I think that is our pain can have power.
Can I say something about 9-year-old Tiffany?
Please do.
So I dedicated the book to 9-year-old Tiffany, and actually 9-year-old Tiffany is my why. I think about the world, what the world looked like when she became disabled, and I'm trying to build and fund and support the things I wish existed for her. Haven't made much forays in the medical realms, but maybe some more medical professionals will watch my talk, and they have more influence in that, and way more needed education in that space. But someone said to me, they said, Tiffany, while you dedicated this book to 9-year-old Tiffany, it's not for 9-year-old Tiffany. And I said, oh, that's so fascinating. Maybe there will be a future book that is for 9-year-old Tiffany. But this past weekend, I met one of the blind climbers. Her daughter was there. Her daughter's 11. And she and the daughter, the 11-year-old, and her mom listened to my audiobook, and then found me the next day. And I got to sign the hardcover copy of my book to her mom and this 11-year-old. And I never thought that an 11-year-old would read this book. And 11 is close-ish to 9. And in some ways, meeting her this past weekend made that dotted line to 9-year-old Tiffany a little bit closer. And I said, maybe in some ways there are parts of this book that are for 9-year-old Tiffany too. And yeah, I think that's a very recent revelation I've had recently, because I was creating this distance by saying this book isn't for her, but if I only wrote one book ever, I wanted to make sure it was to her. And now meeting, some future version of my younger self, reading the book and getting so excited to meet me and signing, like after I signed her book, she like hugged it as she, and her dad was there. And yeah, I'm like, oh, that is a seed that's planted in future version of my younger self, who now I'm curious. And, I wrote to 9-year-old Tiffany, I can't wait to see who you become. And I can't wait to see who this 11-year-old who engaged with this material is going to become, and how she takes that on, not only with her, her disabled mom, I mean, her disabled mom is an elite athlete. Keep an eye out. Maybe you'll see her in LA 28. But yeah, how cool for this 11-year-old to be so in disability community, you know, this paraclimbing community, and getting to meet all of these different people and wanting to learn more and engage with this work.
Yeah.
I love that so much.
That's absolutely beautiful. I'm so happy we're ending on this because it's people listening to this. I can't wait to see what you do. Yeah, I just think it's a really beautiful thing for us to end on, because I think that in that shame to pride space, I think that there's those little versions of us deserve just a lot of love from us right now. And I love that you actively do that. So thank you for sharing all of that with us. Thank you for coming on our show, Tiffany. That we could have recorded for 3 more hours. This is so wonderful. And listeners, check out the links in this episode. You'll have links to her book, everything else. Tiffany, you want to, this is our moment of give you the mic to share. You want people to follow you on a thing, or where they can find you?
Yeah. The best place is tiffanyyu.com, my first and last name.com. And then while you're there is a link to book stuff if you want to figure out ways you can engage and support the book. And if you want to follow me on social media, all of my links to my social channels are there too.
You want to follow her on social media. Thank you so much. This was such a wonderful episode. I love everything we dove into, and I can't wait for it to come out. Listeners, it's the end of the episode. It came out already. But thank you again. Seriously, just a joy to get to chat with you. Erin, as always, thanks for co-hosting with me. I love you. And tune in next time for another episode of Everything You Know About Disability is Wrong.
If you liked what you heard, go ahead and subscribe and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you to our listeners, and as always, thank you to Easter Seals for giving us the space and resources to share such authentic conversations from within the disability community to our listeners.
And we'll see you next time for another episode of Everything You Know About Disability is Wrong.
Everything you know about disability is wrong.
This is a podcast brought to you by Easter Seals.
You know, we actually work for Easter Seals, but maybe our listeners don't know what we do.
That's true. Easter Seals is leading the way to full access, equity, and inclusion for disabled people and their families.
And did you know we've been doing this for more than a century?
This includes helping disabled people find meaningful employment and addressing healthcare needs for all ages.
We're proud to serve communities across the country and ready for the next 100 years. For more, check out easterseals.com.